that was the thing too, practicing that radical honesty. First, honesty got me in the door. I can't stop drinking. And then the taking an honest look at myself and the world as it actually is. That's part of the awakening. It's the truth, right? And some people call it God or presence or universe or just higher self or self-actualization. All of those terms kind of to me lead to the same place, which is I'm now someone is connected with herself.
My next guest is the remarkable Rebecca Gillis. I call her remarkable because here is a woman who's gone through so much pain and suffering, addiction and trauma, much of it related to childhood. Today, we talk about trauma and healing from the standpoint that in order to heal yourself, you need to be in community with others, working together, because as we help somebody, we're actually helping ourselves. As it relates to menopause, menopause in itself is a trauma, but trauma has a funny way of showing up in the body in many different ways. Overwhelm, anxiety, difficulty sleeping with focus, self-sabotage, negative thought patterns, negative self-talk, disassociation, avoidance, and then sometimes you have the extreme where it's overcompensating and too much people-pleasing. All of these symptoms are associated with menopause, and if you have suffered an adverse childhood experience, menopause brings it out. It's the time of the great reveal. But do not despair. Rebecca is going to share with us a beautiful tale of her journey and how she has found healing through acceptance and surrender, even surrendering to the fear of starting a podcast to claim her voice in this arena and share her story. That podcast, Hell, Happiness, Repeat, will launch April 26th, streaming on Spotify, Apple, and just about anywhere you can listen to your favorite podcast. Without further ado, let's have a listen.
Welcome back, listeners. Today's guest is a very important one when we talk about the area of menopause and we're overcoming a lot of our traumas and facing new ones as we age, addressing the aging process. And I have today a guest who can really tap in on that. It is Rebecca Gillis, all the way from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and she is an addictions and a trauma recovery guide. Rebecca, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I always like to start off with tell us your backstory, who you are, what you do, why you do it. But how did you get here first?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, so I'm now in recovery myself, and I've been sober for just over 9 years from alcohol and drugs. And through that journey of recovery, I've uncovered a lot of, well, first, the truth is that it's really not about alcohol and drugs. And if it were that easy, that would be great. But that to me is like where I distinguish between sobriety and recovery, where sobriety, is just not drinking. And I always thought that if I just stopped drinking, I would be okay. But recovery is all the stuff underneath that and what drove me to drink in the first place. So I've been drinking, or I had been drinking since I was 12 years old. And also, food addiction is a big part of my story. So I'd been eating food or abusing food and using food since I could feed myself to cope with childhood discomfort, trauma, bullying, and just feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. And just life happens, stuff happened in childhood, and I very early on adopted coping mechanisms and tools to use that weren't so first it was food before I wasn't drinking at 4 years old or five, but I was eating. And I was eating the way an alcoholic drinks, in isolation, in shame, and worrying people, like my mother, worrying about my gaining weight and using other people. So codependency, right? Relying on others. I would do anything for another person. I had a very dysfunctional childhood friendship, and and there was abuse there, and I would do anything to keep the friendship. So I learned to please others. And then on the flip side, anger, acting out, lashing out, self-protection, came into play.
Right.
and just not ever feeling lovable or wanted or comfortable, and sort of like I was a mistake. And anytime I excelled or achieved, or I wanted praise and I wanted validation, but it also, I felt like this is wrong, it's a mistake. So I wasn't comfortable in success either. So
Yeah.
I sought out destruction instead.
What was the pivotal point where you finally said, I can't do this? I have to get off of this roller coaster?
Yeah, so fast forward to 38, a few years before that, things were happening where I still had the job, I still had my family, I still, on the outside in many ways looked very sick, fine, but internally I was falling apart when I was wanting to not be alive anymore. And I couldn't stop drinking. Alcohol wasn't working anymore. And I tried moving to another city. I tried other jobs. I tried everything. And I met, well, I had an old friend who came back to the city who was sober. And so my first point of recovery was surrendering to the fact that I could not drink, but I could not stop drinking on my own. I had to believe and know that there's nothing left to try. I tried counseling and dry Januaries and all of this stuff, and they were just more failures. And I always thought it was lack of character or willpower that just made me feel worse and have lower self-esteem. So that pivotal point was finding someone who'd already found recovery. And he moved back to the city. And when that happened, still took about a year and a half of just being around him and seeing him as an example. And finally surrendering and saying, I can't do this. What do you do? I'll try that. And that was in my case, it was 12-step recovery. That's how it
Right.
began. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And from there I got sober. And I knew I couldn't get sober, yet I knew that going in. I cannot stop drinking. To me, sobriety was the only thing worse than drinking because it was agonizing. It was white knuckling, sitting there saying, just don't drink, just don't drink. Go to the gym instead. Avoid your friends. Get home before 6. And every day, that promise I made in the morning to not drink ever again, I forgot. And by 5 o'clock, I was drinking again. And
Yes.
so I did not have, I had to admit powerlessness and defeat. I can't. The first step to not drinking was to admit I cannot stop drinking. And
Unbelievable. Well, congratulations. And now you're taking your healing journey one step further, and you've moved into now a role of showing others how to do it.
well, yeah, and that's a huge part of recovery is in staying sober. And they say, how do you build self-esteem? Through esteemable acts and realizing you're useful and you have a purpose and you're awake, right? You're awake emotionally, spiritually, physically, you're changed. And I was able, once I got, worked through a lot of that wreckage and looking at all the stuff underneath, which is really what recovery is about, I was then able to carry that message to other people and really just share my own experience, which is this is just as my friend had done for me. I was walking, I equate it with walking through a dark tunnel. And we're all walking through these dark tunnels, and I was became a person who had a lantern walking in front of a person. And I can say, this is how I got through it. And so that is a huge part of recovery is helping others. And I was doing it one-on-one for years. And then with that came food recovery and codependency recovery
Okay.
and just learning to connect with myself and learning who I am and what I love and what I like and what I don't like and how to be honest and live in less fear. And the world didn't seem to be the scary place that it used to be. At times it can be, but I just, yeah, and that's where helping others. And then again, like I did do therapy, I did CBT, I did, it was wonderful for 4 years. And I couldn't do that when I was still in the addiction because I wasn't clear and I wasn't honest and I wasn't awake yet. So
Ah,
you become awake, you awaken, and then it's like now a therapist can actually access me and I can connect and I can get somewhere. There's this saying that, the only three things required for recovery are willingness, honesty, and open-mindedness. So I had to be open to everything. And because I had, you and I were talking earlier today about like limiting core beliefs. And I had so many core beliefs, like probably hundreds. You can distill them down to maybe 10, but about myself and the world, right? And one of those was that I'm a piece of you know what, and I shouldn't be here, and I'm not lovable, and I'm not really helpful to anyone, and I need other people to be okay. I can't be okay on my own, and that I cannot ever stop drinking or live without alcohol. So that's a big core belief to how are you going to stop drinking when that's part of your being, that you need alcohol to survive? And there's no other way to do it than to just wait till the end. Those core beliefs started to lift and change to rather than not being a part of and not being enough and unworthiness to confidence and love and healthy pride, you know? It's okay to say that you have gifts. I couldn't say that. I was one of those people who would just say, if you gave me a compliment, I'd insult myself. Or I'd change it back to you and say, no, no, you look good. I don't look good. You look good.
Yeah.
And just being able to say, thank you. And that, yeah, they're right. I do look good. And
Yeah.
I don't, and being honest, maybe the other person doesn't look good, and I'm not going to tell them they do. That was the thing too, practicing that radical honesty. First, honesty got me in the door. I can't stop drinking. And then taking an honest look at myself and the world as it actually is. That's part of the awakening. It's the truth, right? And some people call it God or presence or universe or just higher self or self-actualization. All of those terms kind of to me lead to the same place, which is I'm now someone is connected with herself. And I do a lot of work in like the inner child work. And I mean, there are a lot of definitions of that, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. These core beliefs that we live in, and as children, we get stuck in. As we grow up, we carry those around and we have no connection with ourselves. And there's these parts of ourselves that are stuck. And the word trauma is used a lot. And what is a trauma? It's a stuck, unprocessed memory, or it's a stuck thing that we subconsciously keep acting on. So I don't have any relationship with this subconscious part of me because I'm not awake and I'm not connected, but it's driving my whole life. These beliefs and these something that happened to me when I was 7, I'm acting out on at 40. So
Exactly.
doing a lot of work there of connecting with myself, those parts of me that were injured and stuck and releasing them. And it's quite beautiful, the work that I've done and that I now do with others, where you get to know that little girl in you that in my case I abandoned for a quarter of a century. And I didn't know her and she didn't trust me. And I resented my younger self for costing me opportunities. So there was a divide and a wedge there. And through that work, once I'm but sober, emotionally sober enough to do this work. And what is emotional sobriety? To me is really those core beliefs being shifted and lifted and reconnecting with myself. To me, that's how I define God, is that inner connection where I'm in a place of I know the truth. I I stand in my authentic self and I get answers and intuition. And that word intuition, right? I can follow my intuition. Not always. I mean, things flare up, of course, right? It's not like childhood trauma and core beliefs are just removed like a surgery. But over time, slow and steady, as I can take chances on myself because of this work. And the more I take chances on myself and listen to that inner child and inner self, the more self-trust and love and forgiveness that comes. And that's why now I can make a podcast rather than just staying in a career I detest and I'd never thought was for me, out of fear and feeling small and saying that's all you can do. And I don't believe that anymore. I'm still terrified. And I mean, being new to this is and really annoying. It's like a lot of work and fear, but because I have that foundational connection with myself, I go back to that inner child and the wisdom there where it's okay to play today. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to just try something. And that voice that used to be there saying, no, you don't, stay back in the box. You don't get to do that. That's not for you. That's for others. That's a quieter voice today. And that's what I want to share with others, where, yes, it starts with addiction and trauma and all that stuff, but where you can get to. And I'm still on that path. We all are. But I want to help
Mm-hmm.
other people with that. So, yeah.
Oh my goodness. You said so many amazing, beautiful things. Like I want to unpack it all and just amazing. But I want to bring it back to the whole menopause journey. And we spoke just before we hit the record button that
Yeah.
you yourself are foreign to the where we are in the perimenopause journey. But I can say that one is, and there's enough empirical information out there now that is leaning toward the fact that as we do age, those earlier traumas will come to surface. I've said this before. Ayurveda says that menopause is the time of the great reveal, and that any of those underlying issues that were not ever properly dealt with will come to the forefront. Just recently, I'd heard a podcast with Dr. Fiona Lovely, who has been on my show as well. And she spoke with her guest about what's called ACEs. And you may have heard of this, adverse childhood experiences. And that if the more that we've had of those ACEs, those childhood experiences, the more challenging and difficult it can be on our menopause. And there's probably interesting science, also spiritual work about that, the whole spiritual, the subtle energetic body that can probably explain that even deeper. And you touched on it too. It said it becomes a part in our core. And until we tap into that and allow it to release by doing the work, which is a lot mindset and a lot of heart work, too heart-centered work with the love, the self-love, the radical honesty. But it's as though if we don't yet take those steps and do the work, such as a 12-step program, we will never awaken to it and we'll never let it go. And as we transition through the menopause into our second spring and into our age of wisdom, we're not getting wise until we get wise with ourselves. And your wisdom now that you've just outpoured and shared with us is incredible, but it's deeply rooted in this vulnerability and this honesty, and then just taking that leap of faith. And that is number one reason why I really wanted to bring you on the show to talk about that. I definitely saw a connection with the trauma, the negative core beliefs, no matter what they might be founded in. We believe that, to be successful, we have to be a super skinny, or to be loved, we have to have the perfect skin. And this starts in those early years. Pick up those little signals, those little messages from our parents. And the young brain of a child just absorbs everything. It can't discern between sarcasm and nurturing comments, right? And so we have these scars, and I have to do the work too, which is why I think you and I love to be in the space now of healing and showing others, because the more that we can share and help others, we continue to work on our own healing journey. Would you agree?
Exactly. And that's, I'm starving right now I'm not starving because I'm full, but for people to help, because I feel very vulnerable in this. I'm exposing myself, making a
Yes.
podcast, and I'm new at everything. I'm used to not being new at things. I'm well into a career, which is in our menopausal or perimenopausal years. A lot of us are in that place of, I've been doing something for 20 years, and now I'm new to all of this. I have no idea where it goes. I'm not leaning on a big team of people. It's just me. Oh my gosh, I go on tangents. What was your initial question?
I think you answered it when you said, yes, wanting to do the work, or continue need to do the work because it's so healing for ourselves.
Oh, yes, it was the
And yet,
helping others. Yeah. And so my
yeah.
brain goes everywhere. But I was at this women's event last night, and it was so wonderful. It was all these entrepreneurs in Toronto, all these women and storyteller speakers. And I met these two women. I think they're a couple who are starting a really fun podcast with a fun concept, and they don't know anything. And
Love it.
I love it because I'm like, I need these women in my life because A, they show me what I do know. I have so much to teach them even though I've only been doing this for a few months, and I love them, and I will learn by helping them. And
Yes.
and also it's a joy to watch somebody gain, that's why I love all these Facebook communities too, where you can help people and get helped at the same time. And a friend, an AA friend, a 12-step friend who's gone through similar stuff that we're doing professionally, she said, make sure you're constantly input, output of being helped and helping.
Interesting. I love it.
Yes. So, and it's not even a thing I need to try to do. It's something it just, it's like being hungry and eating food. I need to help others in my recovery. And right now I'm going through a creative recovery, right? Which was my years in advertising were very traumatic and I ignored that. And I just worked
Okay.
hard and it didn't matter how much success I had, I was never enough. And so part of the creative recovery are these core beliefs that we're now in this, what did you call it? The second, our new awakening
Second,
or
our second spring. Yeah. Our age of wisdom.
yeah, where
Yeah.
I learned, I'm like, I'd never liked my career and I dreaded it. And when people would say I love my job, I always thought, oh, well, that's not for me. My job's flashy and I get to do fun, creative things, but I dread it and I hate it. And I'm now in a creative recovery, which is an early in it. And that's why I call my podcast Hell, Happiness, Repeat, because the hell we go through is discovering something. Oh no, there's more. Like I just got sober and now it's food. Oh, like dealt with the food thing and now it's and now it's the oh my gosh, I'm grieving the years that I lost, and I'm finally in a place where I can take a chance on myself creatively, but it is hellish because it's new and uncomfortable and but the best part of it is helping others and I'm seeing with my little following I have because I'm new, it's growing and people are reaching out and like coming out of the woodwork, asking for help. Can you help my son? Can you help me? Old colleagues, I'm struggling and I don't know what to do. And I love that's
Mhm.
my favorite sentence. I'm struggling and I don't know what to do because it means they've already surrendered something and they are ready to try something else.
So apropos for the menopause journey too. When women can finally say, I'm struggling, I don't know what to do, they're surrendering to their symptoms and they're allowing themselves to be vulnerable so that the universe can go up and grab them and snatch them and put them in the path of somebody who can tell them. And that comes from
Mm.
community,
Right. And
surrounding
yeah.
yourself with community.
And you're so right. I was just interviewing, doing an episode with my kind of coach therapist, who's also become a dear friend. And we were talking about, that whole when the student's ready, the teacher appears,
Yes, love that
and
saying.
it's like I was in this community for emotional eating and getting really good help with trauma in it, but I was struggling with the food and weight gain. And I was really in the deepest hell I'd been in recovery because, like you'd mentioned earlier, I didn't know I'd been skinny for years because I was in an abstinence based program in food. So I just didn't eat any foods that caused me issues or may cause cravings. I just eliminated them for years. And I left that because it was so restrictive and I knew there was another way. And in that gained 70 pounds because I was no longer restricting anything. And during that time, this woman found me in this Facebook community. I didn't know her. We both done a similar course, and she said, "I see you struggling, and I think I know what's going on, and I think I can help you." And we've now been working together every week for 2 years, and it's like the people if you're open and ready and suffered enough, the right people tend to appear in your path.
True. Mm-hmm. So true.
And so I keep seeing, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I needed. And now, now you're here. And I love the idea that when I can see that I'm that person for someone else, it's like the universe or God saying, it's your turn here. I need you here. And, and that confidence and self-esteem that comes from working through those limiting core beliefs as we go into this new era are, oh yeah, I can help her. I know that. I would have questioned that before because I didn't have the self-esteem or the connection with myself. I know who I am and I know what I'm capable of. And I trust intuition in a way now that like when I show up and do a session with a client, I don't know what I'm going to do. And that's still uncomfortable because most people are like, here's how I work with you. we're going to do trauma or we're going to do narcissistic recovery, whatever. I don't have a set plan because everyone's different. And I go inward and I access it from within and I'm seeing it work. So it's really uncomfortable because I'm looking for the box. Who's going to tell me what to do so I can do it? It has to be
Yeah.
someone else's idea or someone else's direction, or it's not valid. And that's what I always, I grew up with, not to blame my father, I love him, but he's an accomplished academic. So one of the big core beliefs is you're only as good as your degrees and your credibility is based on your credentials. And you're literally like your worth is completely tied to your academic achievements. And that's not what I'm into. But I lived by that until I still do. And I think 2 years ago was when it really started to shift, where I'm not what my father considers successful. I'm not, my worth is not tied into that. Or my mother thinking you have to be thin and young to be acceptable
Hmm.
is not my belief system anymore, not to the same
Beautiful.
degree.
Yeah. There's so many great things that you said. I want to I want to go back on a few of them. The first being instinct and intuition. And as that relates to, getting wiser as we age, that inner knowing, it's come to be my belief, and I'm seeing more and more evidence of this and listening to the great orators of our time and even beforehand and leaning into that. We can't come to that inner knowing until we've walked a journey, a difficult journey, and recognized who we are. But sometimes the world has to reveal to us, you need to see some of the ugly truth to see the beautiful. And that like dichotomy, the light, the dark, it's all part of who we are, and tapping into that and getting comfortable with what's uncomfortable of that time of that great reveal.
Mhm.
And so as we go through that, and this brings me back to that next thing, is that we're starting to lean into that intuition, and you've explained it so beautifully, and you're just going with that gut, that feeling, yes, I'm going somewhere with this. I don't know necessarily what the day is going to bring, but I know that this is where I need to be, and I can't necessarily plan it. Like, when we leave our corporate jobs, everything's so regimented and planned and well scripted. But then what you did say is grieving the years that we lost. And that's what a lot of us women do. We feel like oh gosh, and I catch myself doing this too. Listeners, yes, this menopause doula still is in that space too, where I say, if I had just kind of done it differently and had taken this road, I probably wouldn't be, facing some of the challenges that I have, that inner dialogue, that negative narrative that I have. But now, with my intuition, my instinct, that higher knowing, I'm saying to myself, yeah, but if I did do it differently, I would have just gone down in a different direction where there would still be those different struggles. It's because the universe needs you to learn the lesson. And until you learn the lesson, you can't sort of like, it's like a Monopoly game. You can't go to the next stage. You can't pass go until you've actually figured it out the first time around, or maybe the second or the third time around, whatever that might be. And
Yeah.
to me, it's arriving at that place where we surrender, because that is where we become completely empathetic. And that is another key thing about menopause, is that the menopausal woman, midlife and beyond, post-menopause, the wise woman is the empathetic woman. Like the dear wise woman, the matriarch of our family, grandma. She's
Yeah.
loving, she's wise, she's kind. We need to walk that journey to get there. Just we're doing it more loudly now because we have groups such as Facebook, and we have podcasts. So we're living that journey out loud with each other. But how beautiful that is, that we can come together and share it in community. So I applaud
It's
you, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and community is so important because when I think about it's quite simple. You're like, I picked up this from here and I picked up this from this person. It's all community. And then I collect
Yes.
those things and carry them to share with others. And that's really the simplest model of it is I need others to, I used to rely on others to do for me what I needed to do for myself, right? I want them to do, and even with a podcast, I'm like, I want someone to save me and just do all this for me. And it wouldn't work. But I rely on community to support me as I do it. And that's like I couldn't someone else couldn't get me sober. I tried that. The right boyfriend will get me sober. The right relationship, the right psychiatrist will get me sober or happy.
Yeah.
They'll
Yeah.
get me happy. They are instead what they're doing is they've taught me people in my community when I turn to the right sources too, not leaning on and trying to find another parent or another, Yeah, they teach me how to do this myself, which I then carry to others. And I like even at this event last night, just being around all these women and this keynote speaker who was incredible. Her story was, I, I just got so inspired. And she was talking about that, how women need to carry each other, like build each other up and not put each other down. And connection and community is what matters. And I keep hearing that theme this week, actually, the word community a lot.
It's funny. Me too. It's popping up left, right, and center. And I will say one of the reasons why I believe that, like when we think of community, if I were to say to you, Rebecca, do you feel a feminine energy or a masculine energy? When I say the word community, what comes to your mind?
Feminine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the year of a divine mother energy. It's an 8 years. So 2024, you add up the numbers and you always round down to your final single digit number. So you add it up, we have an 8 year. I'm huge on numbers. So, listeners, there's going to be more about this numerology coming out further and further in my podcasts because that's what authentically makes me me. I constantly think and see in numbers. And I've recently been drawn to a couple of podcasts around numerology, and one of them explained the 2024 year as the Divine Mother, the energy year. Lots of energy towards nurturing, lots of energy towards supporting one another as we see kind of a shift. And this was mentioned in my episode 18. There is a global shift in the frequency of the planet. But until we can arrive at that vibration of our conscious collectiveness, the conscious energy, we have to do the work individually as individuals, raise our vibration. And the 8 year is a time of year where there is going to be lots of more nurturing coming together. And that's what women have been doing throughout the history of time is creating community around, the tribe together and raising the children. It takes a village to raise a child. Those expressions come from an actual structure that had existed in time. 2023, on the other hand, was a building year, laying the foundation, laying the structure, laying all the building blocks so that we can enter into the nurturing, the more caring, energetic, feminine energy. And when I say feminine, masculine energy, we all have it, male and female, but we all have it, that the Ida and the Pingala, both sides of the energetic body. You and I met through our podcasting group in 2023 when we were building the foundation to have a structure in place that we can enter into our nurturing capacity and that community. And that became very apparent to me when we were talking, because I wanted to share with the listeners exactly how you and I did come to meet. And that was through our podcasting workshop group. And so and then again, we're joining Facebook groups together. So we went from one podcasting group workshop to another. We're in Facebook groups together. What a wonderful way of having community in this day and age in 2024 as well, when we can live in the digital space. So we don't always have to be, what community am I going to join in my community? No, it's right here, right at our fingertips in the digital space. So I just wanted to put that out there. I thought that was really quite interesting. You and I have both been hearing that word quite a lot lately. And I actually just did a recent interview and she asked me, what would be 3 things that you would tell a woman going through perimenopause who is struggling, what she can do right now? And the first word that rolled off my tongue, go find yourself some community. Find your people that you can lean into, because in doing so, whatever they have to offer, there's something. Sometimes we just don't know. It's called trusting that instinct. But there's these stories that we tell, because in itself, it validates one that we're going through. It normalizes what we're going through. It brings it to the forefront so that we can be okay with it. But it's also a form of talk therapy, if you will. We tell stories, we talk it out. And you said this a couple of times. You collect, somebody will have some nugget that you can add to your toolbox to enrich your experience further so that you can be more healing and helpful for others. And that's what we do. It's that.
Yeah.
And I was listening actually this morning just on the live feed, and Dr. Marie Claire Haber was the guest speaker. And she said, we need more together and less competition. We need
Mm.
more togetherness and less single-mindedness in our journey, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
So,
Right. That's the whole thing. And Eckhart Tolle talks about that too, how he said there's never been a time where we've needed to awaken more. And he said some are awakening and some are clinging to staying asleep. And I remember I went to see him live in Toronto, and he was at this venue that was at least 5,000 people. And looking around and thinking, look, this spiritual healing and journey stuff is now mainstream. Like there's 5,000 people who are all sitting here just to see this man talk about the same thing that I've been into. And it was very emotional to see that. And yeah, and then finding those communities, which I were both part of so many of them. And our podcasting, I didn't know what it was going to be about when I first explored pod. I thought it was going to be like a lot of numbers and metrics and how do you get 1 million followers and how do you, and of course there's elements of that, but it's spiritual. And I think it's attracting people who are in that stage that you talk about. I don't, I mean, there's young podcasters, but I see a lot of people, women and men, who are at the next stage, and they have a voice, they have something to say, and they have experience and they want to share it, and they have interests, and they have, and I love that community coming together. And a
me
lot of them are
too.
healers, a lot of healers. Yeah.
So very true. Yeah. And we don't need to have the great, I mean, how wonderful it would be to wake up every morning and have your guru right at the foot of your bed and saying, okay, let's meditate and let's do some healing and let's burn some sage and get you all fixed. I mean, how lovely that would be. But we don't have to turn to the greatness to be able to achieve that. We have that just from leaning into somebody who's walked the walk, so to
Yeah.
speak. I'm glad you mentioned Eckhart Tolle. He's been mentioned several times on my past podcast guests when I asked them, what book of yours has really touched your heart, or what are you reading lately? What does that say about you? And so if you wanted to share, do you have a favorite book? And why is it? What sage message can you share about that book for the listeners?
Well, one of my favorites currently is The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, because it's so, it actually, I like, part of what I love about it is that it bothers me and it gets my back up sometimes, because it's so rich and dense. It's dense in a great way. Like it took me, I don't even know if I've ever read the whole book. Every time I do a chapter, I end up practicing what he suggests, and every sentence is its own thing. And but sometimes I'm thinking, how can anyone ever achieve what he's talking about? It's like this perfect state of just no preferences and just peace.
Mm.
That's what I love about it. I have his course as well. And I love just when I forget moments where as my therapist used to say, we fall asleep and then we wake up again. Oh, I forgot. I was asleep, and we wake up again. And
So true.
he helps me awaken again and same with Eckhart Tolle. Like, for example, I'm walking on down, sorry, by the lake, and I'm picturing what that's going to look like. I have expectations. The lake's going to be quiet and all nature and serene just for me to walk. And I get down there, and there's a guy doing a Zoom call on his phone right in front of me, between me and the water. There's two guys practicing some weird instrument, and all of a sudden the walk is ruined, right?
Yeah.
And then I remember, like, I used to do walks. I should get back to this. It's funny. I'm in a new relationship, and I feel like it's kind of derailed a lot of my spiritual practice, which it's just an adjustment. And I'm walking and I remember the things I learned from the untethered soul and,
Beautiful.
opening your heart and letting go. And it physically changes. Like the guy on the phone receded. I couldn't hear him and I actually felt connected to him. And then the guys playing the instrument started to sound beautiful and interesting rather than ruining my day. And I was touching trees and listening to the sound of the leaves. And I ended up talking to the guys about their instrument. It was some African tube thing. It was really cool. And
Wow.
that whole thing was my preferences left, my perception changed, and I had a beautiful experience.
Exactly. It's about, downing swords, surrendering to the moment, being present, and then allowing whatever happens to happen.
Yeah.
It's that surrendering to the moment. How beautiful is that? Thank you for sharing us that
Well,
with
there's also
us.
another book too that's comes from it's Hal Elrod and it's called Miracle Morning. And I actually discovered him
Yes.
through Kathy Heller. She interviewed him. He's wonderful. And I liked his approach because he's got a structure. Because sometimes I need structure and I'm not disciplined, but I don't want boxes where I feel it's too rigid. But sometimes I'm like, with my inner child running the show, I'm all over the place. So I like that he structures this thing he calls savers, which is like a 5 things you do, like meditation, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, writing. And you do it every morning. But I love it because he structures it in a way where you can pursue goals. Because sometimes surrender can feel so loose where I'm like, what am I? That's where like Michael Singer confuses me sometimes, where I'm like, what am I supposed to be doing then if I'm supposed to be letting go of all preferences and care? And I like that how
Mm-hmm.
Elrod kind of grounds you in what is it you want and how can you pursue that through a morning routine that's very spiritual as well as practical and goal oriented. So
So
it's,
awesome. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So beautifully said. That's so perfect. Those two
I
books are
love
a nice
that.
dichotomy.
They totally
Wow.
reflect what you were talking about. We're in flow right now, I think, you and I.
It is. I'm really
Me too.
feeling that. And as I've been watching a lot, sharing your messages through and being completely vulnerable in our podcasting groups. And then just the outpouring of people there to say, I've got some ideas. Well, here's my suggestions. Or,
Yeah.
okay, sit down, have a coffee because I'm going to write 18 paragraphs of
I
something.
love
And
that.
I love that how we can just be, as we can just share and take up, hold space for one another, for sure. And so,
Yeah.
Rebecca, please tell the audience where they can find you. Tell them about when you're going to launch in your podcast. I would love for people to reach out and see what you have to share with the world.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. So right now I'm on Facebook. I have a Facebook group called Hell Happiness Repeat Podcast Community. I'm also on Instagram, Hell Happiness Repeat, and people can also DM me there if they have questions or want to work one-on-one or just want to chat, honestly, and aren't sure what to do or where to begin because that's what I needed when I was new. I wasn't signing up for anything. I wasn't spending any more money. I just needed someone to talk to. So yeah, that's where they can find me. And I'm launching April 26th. So I'll be on
Okay.
Apple, Spotify, all that. And yeah, they can find me there as well.
I'll be sure to get those links in the show notes. I've thoroughly enjoyed our time together. I really
Same.
feel like we have kindred spirit. We could talk. And your message is going to be so vital to those who are going through the menopausal transition, or maybe they're not. They're just listening, going, hey, wow, that was a really interesting piece of advice. I like that.
Hmm.
So thank you for being here, Rebecca. And I would love to bring you back again.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, let's do that.
For this episode, which is episode 25, I'm finishing it off a little differently than I've done before. I've decided to get more anecdotal with you rather than summarize my key takeaways from the interview. Because as far as I'm concerned, the more you can humanize a topic of conversation by being personal, well, one of two things can happen. One, listeners will like you more because you are valued as that much more real, authentic, and relatable, or they won't. But regardless of the outcome, I'm going to get real and personal because I am totally inspired by Rebecca's courage and with what she has called radical honesty. Since learning to become a menopause doula and experiencing my own menopause symptoms, it has become abundantly clear that if you don't get radically honest with your trauma and the things that we pretend and ignore never happened and subsequently suppressed, then you're going to have a terrible midlife transition and probably a shitty post-menopause life. My trauma stems from, and like many of us, childhood experiences, but most of mine actually comes from a military career and the things that us young women in uniform in the 80s and 90s experienced. So this is the personal, getting real part that I've been wanting to do. This was a great opportunity in this episode to do it. Now, first of all, don't get me wrong. I am absolutely proud to have served my country and to have gained the education and the knowledge and the personal and professional development from having served. But there was a gross mistreatment that occurred and inappropriate events that were witnessed that have been left unchecked for me. Now, without getting into too much of the details, because I actually probably will leave that for a later episode, I can say that turning to alcohol as a means to mask and to manage was pretty common, which can become habitual over time. And now in perimenopause, well, two things have become apparent. Alcohol and hormone changes do not mix, and buried trauma, well, it will come to bear. Now, fortunately, there's a burgeoning field of research correlating adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, with menopause. See, these high levels of stress during childhood, such as abuse and neglect, and even household dysfunction, what it happens is it affects the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, that HPA axis. This is a neuroendocrine link between perceived stress and psychological reactions to stress. So if you have disruptions to the HPA axis, it can lead to dysregulations of hormones, potentially affecting various physiological processes, including those that are related to menopause. So understanding your health and well-being as an adult may actually mean looking back to your childhood, to trauma that you experienced as a kid. And so when you can correlate the impact of this childhood trauma and menopause, you are probably in a better position to get the proper support and healthcare and self-care that you deserve and you need. Okay, so this is when I make that plug for somebody else's work in this field. So I'm going to make a huge shout out to Dr. Sarah Godfrey, who I've mentioned briefly in previous episodes. Dr. Gottfried is a scientist and a Harvard-educated medical doctor, and she is absolutely busting open the research in the field of hormone health. She's developed this ACE assessment, and I'll link that in the show note where you can find it. This is actually a great assessment to help women better understand their trauma and its adverse effects on their health. So I have taken the quiz because I want to better understand just what is happening with me so that I can have a better understanding of the healthcare needs that I need as I go through menopause and experience all these different changes. Physiologically, yes, but for me, it's been mostly cognitive. I want to give another shout out also to Rebecca. I'm so enamored with her courage, and I can't wait to hear more of her stories on her podcast. It will be a weekly podcast, Hell, Happiness, Repeat. I said it before. It launches April 26th. Her links are in the show notes, and you can also find her on Instagram at Hell, Happiness, Repeat. Do you need support through your menopause transition? A menopause doula can help. You can find me at mlcoaching.com. And help me help you by filling out a simple survey, which is linked in the show notes. Your input is greatly valued and will help in the design and creation of tools, courses, and other resources for my upcoming one-on-one and group coaching programs. Take the survey, it's linked in the show notes. Like, follow, share, subscribe. And if you are enjoying this podcast, I would love to hear from you. Consider leaving a review. Spreading the word will help broaden my audience reach and further impact more women as they experience a transition.